She was 18 years old when she inherited her father's entire world, all of it packed into a single cardboard box. What she found inside, a worn-out Bible, would lead her to a piece of land no one knew existed, and a truth that would rewrite her entire life. If you've ever felt like your own story was written by someone else, or that a piece of your history was missing, then I think you'll want to stick around. Hit that subscribe button because we're about to go on a journey, and it starts right now. The day I turned 18 felt less like a celebration and more like a closing statement. For the last 6 years, since my father's death, I'd been a ward of the state, a file in a cabinet, a name on a list. Now, legally, I was just me, Eliza. No longer a case number. The freedom was supposed to feel like a deep breath, but it mostly felt like the cold, thin air at a high altitude. You know you're on top of something, but you can't quite breathe right. Mr. Henderson, my caseworker for the final 2 years, had that look on his face he always got when he was trying to appear sympathetic, but was really just checking off a task on his to-do list. It was a look of professional, measured pity. "This is it, Eliza," he said, placing a dusty cardboard box on the metal folding table between us. The box was sealed with yellowing tape, my father's name scrawled on the side in faded black marker, Daniel Roche. His personal effects, they've been in county storage. Personal effects. The phrase sounded so clinical, so final, like evidence from a crime scene. I stared at the box. It wasn't large. You could fit a couple of pairs of shoes in it, maybe a winter coat. It seemed impossibly small to contain a whole life, even a life as truncated as my father's. He'd been a logger up in the northern part of the state, a man who smelled of pine sap and sawdust, whose hands were maps of calluses and scars. He'd been quiet, but his presence had been huge, a mountain of a man who made me feel safe, until he wasn't there anymore. A logging accident, they told me. Quick, they said, as if that was some kind of consolation. "There's not much," Mr. Henderson continued, his voice gentle but firm, a practiced tone for delivering disappointing news. "A watch, some clothes, a few books. Standard procedure. We hold it until the next of kin comes of age." I was the only next of kin. My mother had left when I was a toddler, a ghost in a handful of faded photographs. My father never spoke of her. It was just him and me in a small rented house at the edge of the woods until it was just me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I didn't want to cry in front of him. Crying in the system was a currency, but you had to be careful how you spent it. Show too much emotion, you were unstable. Show too little, you were detached, a risk. I had learned to live in the quiet, gray middle. "You have a place to go?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I'd be moving into a transitional housing program, a single room with a shared bathroom down the hall. It was a step up from the group home, but it wasn't a home. It was another waiting room. "Yes," I said. My voice was a croak. I cleared my throat. "I have a place." He pushed a thick manila envelope across the table. "Your final papers, birth certificate, social security card, a check for the balance of your father's final paycheck and the state stipend. It's not a lot, Eliza, but it's a start." A start. It felt like an end. I took the envelope and the box. The box was heavier than I expected. I didn't open it there, in that sterile office with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of industrial cleaner in the air. I wanted to be alone when I finally looked at the last pieces of my father. I carried it on the bus, holding it on my lap like a fragile, sleeping child. The other passengers paid me no mind. I was just another girl with a box, moving from one place to another, the story of the city. My new room was exactly as I'd pictured it. Beige walls, a single bed with a thin mattress, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The institutional aesthetic was a familiar comfort. I placed the box on the bed, the springs groaning in protest. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at it. The tape was brittle. I picked at a corner and it flaked away, turning to dust under my fingernail. It felt like I was disturbing a tomb. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the tape off. It made a dry, tearing sound. The cardboard flaps sighed open. Inside, the smell hit me first. Faint, but unmistakable. Pine, motor oil, and old paper. The smell of my dad. A lump formed in my throat, hot and tight. On top was a faded flannel shirt, worn thin at the elbows. I lifted it out and held it to my face, breathing it in. For a second, he was there. I could almost feel his arms around me, the rough texture of his beard against my cheek. Then the moment passed, and it was just an old shirt that smelled like a ghost. Beneath the shirt was a cheap Timex watch with a cracked face, its hands frozen at 4:17. I wondered if that was the time it happened. I didn't want to know. There was a worn leather wallet, empty except for a photo of me, age 12, grinning with a missing front tooth. And at the bottom, there were 3 books. 2 were paperback westerns, their covers creased and torn. The 3rd was a Bible. It was a simple, black leather-bound King James version, the kind you find in motel drawers. The leather was soft and peeling at the corners, the gold lettering of Holy Bible all but worn away. My father had never been a religious man. He'd never taken me to church. His religion was the forest, the cathedral of ancient trees, the sermon of the wind in the branches. I couldn't imagine him reading this. I frowned, running my thumb over the worn cover. It felt strange in my hands, a contradiction. I almost set it aside, dismissing it as just another random object he'd picked up somewhere. But something made me pause, a thickness, an unnatural bulge along the inside of the front cover. The inside cover was lined with a stiff piece of black paper glued to the leather. But near the spine, the paper was puckered, slightly loose. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I picked at the edge of the paper with my fingernail. It was dry and brittle, and a small corner lifted away. I could see something else underneath. Not cardboard, something pale and creased. My fingers trembled as I carefully worked the paper loose, tearing it back slowly. It came away with a soft, ripping sound, revealing a hidden pocket expertly sliced into the thick cardboard of the cover. And tucked inside that pocket was a single, folded piece of paper. It was old, yellowed, and soft as cloth. I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a map, hand-drawn in faded blue ink. It was a topographical map, showing contour lines, a river, and a creek. There were no town names, no road markers, just geographic features. A prominent ridge was labeled Sleeping Bear Ridge. A winding river was simply the Blackwater. In the center of the map, circled in red, was a small square with an X through it. Next to the square, in my father's familiar blocky handwriting, were 2 words: Safe Harbor. And below that, a series of numbers that looked like coordinates. My breath caught in my chest. What was this? Where was this? My father had owned nothing. He'd been a renter his whole life, a man who lived paycheck to paycheck. The idea that he had a piece of land, a secret place hidden away, felt impossible. It felt like a dream. I spent the next 3 days obsessed. I took the bus to the main library, a place I hadn't been in years. The reference librarian was a kind, older woman with half-moon glasses who seemed genuinely thrilled to have a real research question instead of just helping someone find the bathroom. I showed her the map. Sleeping Bear Ridge, she murmured, tapping her chin. That sounds familiar. Up north. Let's check the state geological surveys. She pulled out enormous, heavy books of maps, laying them open on a wide table. We spent hours poring over them, tracing the lines of rivers and the shaded contours of mountains. And then we found it. On a detailed survey map of Haven County, a sparsely populated region 400 miles north, there was a Blackwater River. And just west of it, a long, sloping formation officially called Bear Mountain, but known locally, according to a footnote, as Sleeping Bear Ridge. We had found the area, but when we tried to cross-reference the coordinates my father had written, we hit a wall. The location they pointed to was a blank spot on the map. It was designated as part of a vast, unincorporated state forest buffer zone. There were no property lines, no access roads, no indication that anyone owned it or lived there. It's nothing, the librarian said, peering at the map through her glasses. According to this, it's just wilderness. Are you sure about those numbers? I was sure. I had checked them a dozen times. Safe harbor. The words echoed in my mind. It wasn't just a place, it was a promise. My father had left this for me, and only me. He had hidden it so well that it didn't officially exist. The world had told me my father left me with nothing, a box of clothes and a broken watch. But the map in my hand told a different story. It was a story I didn't understand, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had to follow it. I had $2,200 to my name. It was supposed to be my security deposit, my first month's rent, my everything. It was my start. I looked at the map, then at the check in my wallet. A start. Maybe this was what a real start looked like. Not a beige room in the city, but a blank spot on a map, a place called Safe Harbor. The bus ride north was a journey through a landscape that slowly erased everything I knew. The city's dense grid of concrete and steel gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to rolling farmland, and finally, to the deep, endless green of the northern woods. For 18 hours, I watched the world blur past my window, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt a hypnotic mantra. I was leaving the system behind. Every mile put more distance between me and the group homes, the caseworkers, the life that had been assigned to me. I was terrified, and I had never felt more alive. The bus dropped me off in a town called Jasper, the closest settlement to the coordinates on my map. Jasper was less a town and more a suggestion of one. A gas station, a general store, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine. The silence was immense, broken only by the cawing of crows and the distant rumble of a logging truck. I felt like I had stepped onto a different planet. According to my calculations, I still had another 30 miles to go, deep into the forest. There were no more buses, no taxis. I walked into the general store, the bell over the door announcing my arrival with a cheerful jingle. An old man with a weathered face and a plaid shirt sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at me over his glasses, his expression neutral but curious. Strangers were probably an event here. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I need a ride," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Out toward the Blackwater River area." He lowered his newspaper. "Blackwater? There's nothing out there but trees and bears. Logging roads washed out in 3 places. You can't get a car through." My heart sank. "Washed out?" "Spring thaw was a bad one," he said, folding the paper neatly. "Took out the old culverts. State won't fix it. Nobody goes up there anymore. Not since the logging company pulled out years ago." He was looking at my city clothes, my single backpack. He saw a lost tourist. I had to prove I wasn't. I pulled the hand-drawn map from my pocket and spread it on the counter. His eyes widened slightly. He leaned in, his gaze tracing the familiar lines of the river and the ridge. "Well, I'll be," he breathed. "Haven't seen one of these in a long time. That's a trapper's map." "Old-timer's map." He looked from the map to my face, a new light of understanding in his eyes. "You're Daniel's girl, aren't you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I could only nod, my throat suddenly too tight to speak. I knew it, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You've got his eyes. Name's Gus. I knew your father. He was a good man. Quiet, kept to himself, but a hard worker, a real woodsman. He tapped the map. He drew this, didn't he? He was always sketching things. You knew him? I whispered. Sure, he'd come in here for supplies, always paid cash. Said he was working a claim up on the ridge, but he never said what he was looking for. Gus's smile faded a little. Heard about the accident. We were all sorry to hear it. He was one of the good ones. He looked back at the map. So, you're trying to get to his claim? I think so, I said. It's called Safe Harbor. Gus nodded slowly. That sounds like him. Look, the road's out, but I've got an old ATV in the back. It'll get you most of the way. The rest you'll have to do on foot. It's rough country, girl. You sure you're up for it? I met his gaze. I have to be. An hour later, I was bouncing along a rutted, muddy track on the back of a four-wheeler, Gus driving with a practiced ease. The forest closed in around us, a dense wall of green and brown. The air grew cooler, wilder. After about an hour, he pulled to a stop where a massive fallen tree blocked the path completely. This is as far as she goes, he said, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. From here, you follow that creek upstream, he pointed. It'll take you to the base of the ridge. The coordinates on your map should put you right on top of it. It'll be a hard climb. 2, maybe 3 hours if you're fit. He handed me a small canvas bag. Some water, beef jerky, and a good compass. That one of your dad's is probably 30 years old. Thank you, Gus, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to repay you. No need, he said, waving a hand. Daniel was a friend. You find what you're looking for. That's payment enough. I'll be back here day after tomorrow, around noon. If you're not back, I'm sending the sheriff. I nodded, shouldering my pack. The weight of it, combined with the weight of my father's secret, felt immense. I watched Gus turn the ATV around and disappear back down the trail. Then I was alone. Truly alone, for the first time in my life. The forest wasn't quiet. It was alive with the buzz of insects, the chatter of birds, the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. I took a deep breath, checked the compass, and started walking. The climb was harder than I could have imagined. The ground was steep and slick with damp leaves. Brambles tore at my clothes. My lungs burned, and my legs ached. More than once, I wanted to turn back. The city, my beige room, the structured emptiness of my old life. It seemed so safe, so easy. But then I would touch the map in my pocket, the paper soft as a prayer, and I would keep going. Safe harbor. I was climbing towards a promise. After what felt like an eternity, the slope began to level out. The dense forest thinned, opening into a small, high meadow filled with wildflowers. And there, at the far edge of the meadow, nestled in a grove of ancient pine trees, was a cabin. It was small and simple, built of dark, weathered logs, with a stone chimney and a sagging porch. It looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. It was exactly where the X on the map was. My legs felt weak with relief. I had found it. I had made it. I walked slowly across the meadow, my boots sinking into the soft grass. The cabin was silent, watching me. There was no smoke from the chimney, no light in the single window. The place felt suspended in time, waiting. The porch steps creaked under my weight. The front door was made of heavy, split logs, with a simple latch. It wasn't locked. I hesitated, my hand on the cold iron. This was it. The threshold. The moment where the story changed. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing the darkness inside. The air that drifted out was cool and musty, smelling of dust, cold ashes, and time. I stepped inside, and my eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. The cabin was one room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a thin layer of gray ash covering the hearth. There was a simple wooden table and 2 chairs, a bed frame in the corner with a rolled-up mattress, and shelves on the wall holding a few tin plates and a dusty lantern. It was Spartan, but it was solid. It was a home. Sunlight streamed through the dirty window pane, illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes. On the table, there was a single object, a tin box about the size of a shoebox with a rusted clasp. It was sitting right in the center, as if it had been left there for me. My heart hammered in my chest. This was the next step, the next clue. I walked to the table and lifted the lid. Inside, there was a thick stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. They were addressed to me. For Eliza, all in my father's handwriting, and beneath the letters there was something else. Stacks of money. $100 bills, wrapped in paper bands. I lifted one out. The band was marked $5,000. There were at least 20 stacks. $100,000. Maybe more. I stared at it, my mind reeling. Where did a logger get this kind of money? What was this place? I set the money aside, my hands shaking, and picked up the bundle of letters. The top one was thicker than the rest. On the front, my father had written, "Read this one first." I untied the twine, my fingers fumbling with the knot. I sat down at the dusty table, in the silent cabin my father had built, and I began to read his story. "My dearest Eliza," the letter began. The sight of his handwriting, so familiar and yet so distant, brought a fresh wave of grief. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, it means I am gone. And for that, my girl, I am more sorry than words can ever say. The thought of leaving you alone in this world is the only thing that ever truly scared me. Second, it means you found this place. You followed the map. I knew you would. You have my stubbornness, and you have my heart. You were always a clever girl. I have a lot to explain, and I don't have much time. I'm writing this a little at a time, whenever I can get away. I need you to understand why I did what I did. Why I lived the way I did. Why I had to let you go into the system after I was gone, instead of leaving you this place right away. It was the hardest decision of my life, but it was the only way to keep you safe. To give you a real future. This land, this cabin, this is our home, Eliza. It doesn't exist on any government map because my grandfather, your great-grandfather, homesteaded it 100 years ago, before the county lines were even drawn, before the state claimed all this wilderness. He was a trapper and a prospector, and he filed a private mineral and land claim, the old-fashioned way, with the Federal Bureau. It's a loophole, a piece of paper in a dusty archive in the Capitol that says these 100 acres and everything underneath them belong to the Roche family. It predates the state forest. It predates the county taxes. As long as we never sold it, never registered it with the state, and never drew attention to it, it was ours. A ghost on the map. Our secret. I had to stop reading. I looked around the cabin, at the solid log walls, the stone hearth. A home. Our home. Not a rental, not a temporary room. A place that belonged to us. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. When I was a young man, I didn't care about any of this. I just wanted to get away. I went to the city. I met your mother. You know that part of the story. Or the little I ever told you. What I didn't tell you was why she left. She didn't just leave us, Eliza. She was running. She got mixed up with some very bad people. Loan sharks, criminals. She had a debt, a big one. And when she couldn't pay, they came after her. They threatened her. They threatened me. And they threatened you. You were just a baby. I brought you both up here, to this cabin, thinking we could hide. But they found us. They don't give up. One night, a car came up the old logging road. 2 men. They weren't here to talk. They wanted their money, or they were going to take it out on us. Your mother was terrified. She saw the violence in their eyes, and she made a choice. She told them she would go with them, work off the debt in whatever way they wanted, if they left me and you alone. She sacrificed herself for you, Eliza. She didn't abandon you. She saved you. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the page. The story I had told myself my whole life, the story of the mother who didn't want me, who just walked away, crumbled into dust. She hadn't left me. She had been taken. I never saw her again, the letter continued, the ink a little smudged in this spot, as if a tear had fallen. I spent years trying to find her, but it was no use. They were ghosts, and they made her a ghost, too. All I could do was protect you. I knew they could come back. I knew that if they ever found out about this land, about its real value, they would stop at nothing to take it. So I created a new story for us. I became Daniel Roche, the simple logger. We lived in a rented house, paycheck to paycheck. I never spent a dime more than I had to. I let the world think I was poor, because the secret of this land had to be protected. And the secret is this, Eliza. My grandfather wasn't just a trapper. He was a prospector. And he struck it rich. The creek that runs down this ridge, the one you followed to get here, it's not just water, it's full of gold. Not a huge vein, not the kind that starts a gold rush, but a steady, reliable placer deposit. Fine gold, washed down from the quartz up in the mountain. For years, I've worked this claim in secret. A few weeks every summer, a few in the fall. I'd tell my boss I was going hunting. Instead, I'd come up here. I'd pan the creek, work the sluice box I built. The money in this box? That's what I pulled out of the ground with my own 2 hands. It's for you. It's your inheritance. It's clean, untraceable. It's your freedom. But it came with a risk. Those men, the ones who took your mother, their organization grew. They became a corporation, a legitimate-looking development company. They buy up land, they strip it, they bleed it dry. And I heard whispers that they were sniffing around Haven County. If they ever found out about this unmapped claim, if they ever connected me to it, they would come for you. So I had to make a choice. If anything happened to me, you couldn't be here. You couldn't inherit this place directly. They would be watching. They would see a teenage girl suddenly owning a valuable piece of property. They would put the pieces together. So I set it up so you would go into the system. It breaks my heart to even write those words. Putting you in their hands, it felt like a betrayal. But I hoped it would be a kind of camouflage. You would be a ward of the state. Poor, alone, with nothing to your name. You would be invisible. And by the time you were 18, old enough to be on your own, maybe they would have forgotten. Maybe you would be safe. This land is your birthright, Eliza. But it's also a danger. The money is yours, no matter what. You can take it and disappear. Build a new life somewhere far away from here. No one would blame you. It's a clean break, a fresh start. Or you can stay. You can claim this land. The original deed and my will are buried under the hearthstone of the fireplace. But if you file that deed, the land becomes public record. They might see it. They might come. Staying is a risk. It's a fight. I can't make that choice for you. I can only give you the truth and the means to decide your own future. Whatever you choose, know this. Every single thing I did, every hard day at the logging camp, every lonely night in this cabin, it was all for you. I love you more than all the trees in this forest. Be safe, my girl. Be happy. Love, Dad. I let the letter fall from my fingers. The cabin was spinning. The air was thick, impossible to breathe. A sound tore from my throat, a ragged, wounded cry that was half grief and half rage. I cried for the father I had lost, and for the father I had never truly known, the secret keeper, the protector, the man who had loved me so much he had orchestrated my loneliness to save my life. I cried for the mother I had hated, who was not a villain but a martyr. I cried for the little girl who felt abandoned, who had spent years building walls around her heart to survive, only to find out she had been surrounded by a fortress of love the entire time. I collapsed onto the floor, the rough wooden planks pressing into my cheek, and I wept until there were no tears left, only a vast, hollow emptiness. The sun went down, and the cabin grew cold. I didn't move. I just lay there, in the dark, the weight of my father's story pressing down on me. He had given me a choice: freedom or a home, a safe escape or a dangerous inheritance. For 6 years, I had dreamed of a home, a real home, a place that was mine, a place to put down roots. But I had always imagined it as a place of peace, of safety, not a battleground. Could I do it? Could I fight for this place? Was I strong enough to face the ghosts that had haunted my family for a generation? The silence of the forest pressed in. It wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was filled with the presence of my father, of his father, of the generations of roaches who had called this mountain their own. I thought about the money in the box. $100,000. I could walk away. I could go to college, get an apartment, build a normal life. A life where I wasn't looking over my shoulder. It was the sensible choice. It was the easy choice. But then I thought about my father, panning for gold in a cold stream, his back aching, his hands raw, stockpiling a future for me, one tiny, glittering flake at a time. I thought about my mother, walking away with monsters to give her child a chance. They hadn't taken the easy way out. They had chosen the fight. They had chosen me. How could I honor their sacrifice by running away? How could I let some faceless corporation pave over this place, this sacred ground that held my entire history? Slowly, I pushed myself up. My limbs were stiff, my face was swollen from crying. I found the old lantern on the shelf, and after a few tries, I got it lit. A warm, golden light filled the cabin, chasing the shadows into the corners. It felt like a small act of defiance. I am still here. We are still here. I walked to the fireplace. The hearth was made of large, flat river stones. I ran my hand over them, feeling for a loose one. Near the back, one stone shifted slightly under my touch. Using a poker from the hearth, I pried it up. Beneath it was a cavity, and inside that cavity was an oilskin pouch. I pulled it out. My hands were steady now. Inside was a single, folded document, brittle with age. It was the original federal claim, dated 1908, signed by a clerk I'd never heard of, granting 100 acres of land and all mineral rights to a Silas Roche. And tucked inside it was my father's last will and testament, simple and handwritten, leaving everything, the claim, the land, the cabin, to his daughter, Eliza Roche. Holding those papers, my choice became clear. It wasn't even a choice. It was a calling. This was my home, and I would not let them take it. The next day, I started to work. I swept the dust and grime out of the cabin. I aired out the mattress. I found a store of canned goods and firewood my father had left in a small cellar under the floor. It was enough to last for weeks. I was making this place mine, one small act at a time. When Gus came back to the trailhead, I was there waiting for him. I told him I was staying. He just nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Figured you might," he said. "Your father had that same look, like a tree that's decided where it's going to grow." He agreed to bring me supplies once a week, to be my link to the outside world. I used some of the cash to pay him, and he argued, but I insisted. This was my responsibility now. I spent the next month in a rhythm of hard, physical work. I patched the roof. I cleared the overgrown path to the creek. I even found my father's old sluice box hidden under a tarp and taught myself how to use it, just as he must have done. I wasn't looking for a fortune. I was looking for a connection, a way to feel him there with me. And then, the outside world found me. A letter arrived with Gus's weekly supply drop. It had been sent to my old transitional housing address and forwarded to the Jasper General Store. The envelope was thick and expensive from a law firm in the city. My hands shook as I opened it. It was from a company called Apex Development Group. They were writing to inform me that they had acquired a number of old, lapsed mining claims in Haven County. They believed my father, Daniel Roach, may have been a squatter on one of these properties. They were prepared to offer a nuisance settlement of $50,000 for me to vacate the land and waive any potential claim I might have. They said it was a generous offer for land that was, for all intents and purposes, worthless and inaccessible. They wanted an answer within 30 days. Apex Development. The name was generic, corporate, but I knew who they were. These were the ghosts, the men who had taken my mother. They had found me, or at least, they had found my father's name. They didn't know about the original deed. They didn't know about the gold. They just saw an obstacle, a loose end to be tied up. $50,000. It was a test. It was a trap. They were offering me the easy way out, just like my father had predicted. They were betting I was just a scared kid who would take the money and run. I stared at the letter, at the cold, legalistic words. For a moment, the fear was overwhelming. I was one person. They were a corporation. They had lawyers, money, power. I had a cabin, an old piece of paper, and a box of cash. But I also had the truth. I had my father's strength and my mother's courage. I walked back into the cabin and wrote my reply on a single sheet of paper. I reject your offer. This land is not for sale. I gave it to Gus the next week. He read it and gave me a long, searching look. You're picking a fight with a big dog, Eliza. It's my fight, I said. The next step was to make it official. I took a bus to the county seat, a 2-hour drive from Jasper. I walked into the county clerk's office, the old deed in my hands. The clerk, a woman who looked bored with her job, barely glanced at me. I handed her the papers. I need to file this deed and record the transfer of title. She took the document and unfolded it. Her expression shifted from boredom to confusion, then to disbelief. She read it, then read it again. She looked at me, then back at the paper. Where did you get this? It was my great-grandfather's, I said. It's been in my family for 100 years. She spent the next hour making phone calls, her voice a hushed whisper. Lawyers were consulted. Supervisors were called in. They treated the deed like a strange artifact from a lost world. But in the end, they couldn't deny it. It was legal. It was binding. It predated their own records. That afternoon, I walked out of the county office as the official, registered owner of 100 acres of land known as the Roche Claim. My ghost on the map was now real. The fight had begun. The first few months were a tense quiet. I knew Apex was investigating. I knew they were digging into my father's life, trying to find a weakness, a loophole. I spent my days working the land, making the cabin a true home. I planted a small garden. I learned the names of the birds, the patterns of the weather. The fear was always there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was matched by a growing sense of belonging. I wasn't just defending a piece of property, I was defending my home, my past, and my future. Gus became my rock. He'd bring me news from town, tell me about the strangers asking questions, the lawyers sniffing around. The community of Jasper, small as it was, began to rally around me in their own quiet way. They were people who understood land and legacy. They didn't like outsiders, especially corporate ones, trying to push people around. They saw my father in me, and they respected the lines he had drawn. The attack, when it came, wasn't violent. It was legal. A notice was posted on my door. Apex Development was suing me. Their claim was that my great-grandfather's deed was invalid due to a century of non-use and failure to pay property taxes. Taxes that had never been assessed in the first place. They were trying to bury me in paperwork, to bankrupt me with legal fees, to force me out. I took the notice to the only lawyer in Jasper, a semi-retired old man named Arthur Vance. He read it over, his brow furrowed. "They have a thin case, but they have deep pockets," he said. "They can drag this out for years. It will cost you a fortune to fight it." "I have money," I said, thinking of the tin box. "My father left me some." Arthur looked at me. "Eliza, this isn't about money. It's about principle. Your father, and his father before him, they held on to this place. It means something. We're going to fight them, and we're not going to use your father's money to do it. We're going to do it the right way." Arthur started a town fund. He argued my case pro bono. People from Jasper and the surrounding farms donated what they could. $5, $20, a jar of canned peaches. It wasn't about the amount. It was a statement. This was their mountain, too. They were standing with me. The legal battle was slow, a grinding war of attrition. There were depositions, motions, hearings. I had to go to the city to face their lawyers in their slick downtown offices. They were condescending, patronizing. They called me a squatter, an opportunist. They tried to twist my father's memory, painting him as a reclusive eccentric. But I held on to his letter. I held on to his truth. I stood in that courtroom, and I told my story. I told them about my father's love, his sacrifice. I told them about the land, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a home to be cherished. I didn't know if it would be enough. The law was a complicated, cold machine. But I had to believe that the truth still mattered. And you know, this whole experience taught me something profound. A home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's a story. It's the sacrifices that came before you and the promises you make for the future. My father didn't just leave me a piece of land, he left me a choice. A choice to accept the story I'd been given or to fight for the truth. He gave me back my own history. The court case is still ongoing. The fight isn't over. But something has changed. I'm not that scared, lonely girl anymore. I have a home. I have a community. I have a purpose. Every morning, I wake up in the cabin my father built, and I see the sun rise over Sleeping Bear Ridge, and I know I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I am the guardian of this place. I am my father's daughter, and I am not for sale. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story, my story, is about finding out where you come from to decide where you're going. It's about the fact that sometimes the greatest gifts don't come in neat packages. They come as challenges, as fights we have to choose. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you had to choose between the easy path and the right one? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Your stories matter. They're a part of this community we're building here. So if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. Let's keep sharing the stories that remind us how strong we really are. You are not alone in your fight. And sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is the strength to stand your ground.